This time on Watchers of Tomorrow, Khan!
Hello everybody, welcome to Watchers of Tomorrow, the sci-fi critique review random tangent show. My name is Gepwin, and I am joined as always by my good friend Dr. Isix.
Hi.
Yes, this week, as you may have guessed, it's the first appearance of Khan into the Star Trek canon.
And, I needed to be sufficiently enthusiastic about it, so...
Yes. This is an episode weirdly named Space Seed.
Yes.
Due to an awkward reference they wanted to make at the end, and for no other reason.
Yeah, I think I would have called it like Botany Bay or something like that to myself, but you know.
Well, botany, seeds.
Yes.
You know. Yeah, overall, weird episode. Starts in the writing phase, actually. This was written by Carrie Wibber and was like rewritten several times and was finally made into a teleplay by Gene L. Kuhn, who we've seen show up a few times, and was rewrites by Roddenberry, but then he didn't get credit on it because of some guild shenanigans and union stuff. Was originally perceived as an episode about a group of space prisoners who were shot into space from Earth and then were going to take over the Enterprise and turn it into a ship of space pirates.
Oh, sweet. R and stuff.
Yeah, it was apparently thought of as too Buck Rogers-y and really dumb. And I think they actually poke fun at this in the episode, which we'll get to.
Yes.
Yeah, numerous rewrites, all that stuff. It's very remembered as an episode, but I imagine that it's less with how good the episode is and how much of a remembered character Ricardo Montalban as Khan became.
Yes. Remembered enough that they made a movie about it.
Yeah, and I'm not up enough of the fandom from this time. I know that Ricardo Montalban was a fairly well-known actor, and he became even more well-known as the host of Fantasy Island later on in his career. And I kind of wonder if that's why they brought him back. I don't know for sure whether he was like a beloved character that the fans really wanted to see again, because he doesn't show up again until the movie.
Yes. For those unaware, that'd be Star Trek II.
Yes.
The Wrath of Khan.
Which was filmed like 20 years later. Like The Wrath of Khan came out in 1982. So, you know, it's a good... This episode first aired in 1967.
So a little bit of span of time.
Yeah, it was quite a ways between this series and the movies. In fact, Star Wars had to happen first. We'll get into that later. But Star Wars is the reason we have Star Trek movies at all.
Excellent. That way we get Star Trek and Star Wars movies now. Hooray!
So we already mentioned one guest star, which is Ricardo Montalban as Khan.
And he's
and the other major guest star we have is Madeline Rue as Lieutenant Marla McIvers.
She was in Murder, She Wrote.
Yes, she was in quite a few things. She was in like 20 or so movies around this time period, and then a bunch of TV appearances going into like the 1980s and 90s.
So she is a fairly active, fairly accomplished actress.
Yes. Too bad she wound up in this.
Yeah. It happens to a lot of people in Star Trek.
Yeah. I mean, I know we talk about it more at the end a bit, but like there are a lot of things to hate about this episode on so many levels.
Huh?
And it's just it's I don't know, this was a hard one for me to actually finish watching because it's just
I don't think I had that kind of reaction, but
yeah, there's a lot of really cringy things happening in this episode overall. And maybe it was just my mood at the time, but it was a very difficult episode to get through.
I didn't have nearly as much difficulty, but I guess maybe some of the subjects that are they're touching upon, yeah, it's like, what the hell, guys?
Yeah. Well, I suppose we should just jump in and then people will know what on earth we're talking about. We can
Indeed.
discuss it more in 20 minutes or so, as we usually do.
Yes. So we start off in space. Then what
Yes,
happens?
we are in space again, but on a ship, obviously.
Yes.
The Enterprise has picked up another unknown ship in deep space.
Sweet.
Uhura picks up old Earth Morse code from the ship and begins to decode it until Kirk tells her to shut up. Which is just rude.
Dude, Kirk, we haven't gotten to the title sequence. You're already being an ass.
She only has one job. And Kirk is like, we got it. Shush. Yeah. Spock identifies the ship as something called a DY-100 class vessel that was built on Earth around the time of the 1990s. Is
cool.
The future.
Did you remember being being on a DY-100 up when? Because I don't.
No, I remember a lot of space stuff when I was growing up, but not one of these things or any of the other stuff that supposedly happens in the 1990s.
Yes. We'll get into that more as we go through.
Yeah, it's silly, but we may as well mention it.
Yes, I think the term for this is, a variant of Z-Rust. This is the future of this previous decade.
Yes. McCoy reports that they are picking up several heartbeats on board, but they are too slow to be human. Spock identifies the ship as the SS Botany Bay, but finds no records of a ship by that name in any historical records from the time period, but says that records from that time are very limited due to it being during Earth's Third World War.
Seems like an important plot point.
Yes, McCoy clarifies that this was what was known as the Eugenics War, where a few, quote, ambitious scientists attempted to improve the human race through selective breeding.
Seems like this is a bad time.
Yeah. We don't get any information on this until later, however, as Kirk decides to beam aboard the ship and orders that the ship's historian, Lieutenant MacGyvers, who he does not remember the name of, join them and be useful for a change.
Wait, a historian named MacGyver or MacGyvers?
With an S. She
Ers,
doesn't
right,
build anything out of paper clips.
I was going to say, it's like, you just picked the name because obviously, Star Trek saw the future and saw there's going to be a show called MacGyver.
Yes, that's totally makes some kind of sense, sure. Scotty reports that the Botany Bay seems to be sensing their impending arrival as the life support systems are all coming online.
Oh, that's useful.
Yes, on board, they find a lot of men and women in some kind of sleeping compartments wearing weird gold meshy clothes.
I think the term is fishnets.
Yeah, but whole body fishnets.
I've seen that.
Yeah, not in. Yeah, I've seen it. Not in the stores that I usually frequent, but I've seen it.
Usually it would be more like a goth night club event, but anyway.
MacGyvers says that this is a sleeper ship where they would place the crew in suspended animation to deal with how long space travel took until the year 2018.
Oh, sweet. So we get FTL this year?
Yeah, though technically this episode's going to be coming out after New Year's, so we just missed it.
Man, if we don't have FTL by the time this episode comes out, apologies, it's my fault.
Yeah, physicist. Why haven't you been on your job, Mr. Physics?
I don't know. Because I don't think strange matter exists, I guess.
Oh, okay. One of the pods begins to activate. MacGyvers identifies the occupant as the probable captain because that pod was often set to revive first. Says he looks as if he is from somewhere in northern India and is probably a Sikh.
Okay.
And that the Sikhs were fantastic warriors, apparently.
Well, there is maybe something to that sort of notion, especially for someone not super versed in history, because there is during the whole British occupation of India, there was several instances where the Sikhs were like really teamed up with the British, and then like there was like some people that were going to like fight them, and then the Sikhs were like, we're going to be like totally badass and win the day despite being outnumbered. But we'll all die in the process.
We'll go into a little more later. There's two things I want to mention here. One, I think the religious connotations of this are pretty crummy.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I was doing a little bit of research. I'm not as versed in the Sikh religion as I would like to be, but I've done some research, but this is from a completely outside perspective.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I came across is apparently there are a couple of ways to pronounce this. I am going with Seek, which apparently is an accepted pronunciation. The other way would be Sick, but if I try to switch the one that I'm using, I'm going to get confused. So just know I'm using Seek, but I recognize that it may or may not be the like accepted pronunciation, but I couldn't find whether or not one of them was more commonly used or more accepted than the other. But yeah, I do think that your thing that Sikhs as a warrior class sort of religion is probably one of the few things anyone would have known about them at this time in North American history.
Yeah, and that's mainly because it's like, oh, we had these interactions with them of this particular nature, and that was mostly through the British, so it's sort of second, third-hand knowledge sort of situation.
Yeah, they're also still a weirdly unknown religion, given that they're like the fourth most populous religion on Earth.
Yep. Yeah, sort of keep their own thing going, I guess.
Yes. So, like us, MacGyver's has become distracted. She's just staring at the man and expositioning at him and go, oh, look at that, muscles.
Well, she is looking upon Ricardo Montalban.
Yes.
What do you expect to do?
I know.
If I was in that position, that's what I would be doing.
It's what last week we both got distracted by Ricardo Montalban for a good 15 minutes at the end of the episode. So, who can blame her?
Yes.
The mechanism that is waking up Ricardo Montalban begins to malfunction, and Kirk has to break him out of the machine before he dies, but he's not in a good state. The man asks how long he has been sleeping, and Kirk informs him that it has been about 200 years before he passes out and they bring him aboard the Enterprise.
Oh.
Kirk and Spock have a discussion about what the Botany Bay could have been doing out here because it is not a ship intended for interstellar travel. Kirk notices the similarity of the name to the prison colony in Australia, but Spock points out that there are certainly easier ways to deal with prisoners than to shoot them into space.
So this is where the previous script version was kind of bleeding through a little bit.
Yes. In sickbay, Kirk is informed that their passenger is probably a eugenically altered human.
Oh no, wait. What's going on here?
Yeah. He was a product of selective breeding, apparently, with a stronger heart, better lungs, and the ability to probably lift two men with one hand and possibly mental acuity or some odd thing to match.
Yeah, so this guy looks like he's like maybe in his 30s, maybe in 40s at this point, which would, if he left Earth in the 90s, which means that, he's probably, selectively bred in like the 50s or 60s.
Yes. We're going to get into how the timeline for this doesn't seem to work out.
Yes.
MacGyver's enters and starts staring at the muscly man who lifts. She asks if he's going to recover, but Kirk takes her aside and chastises her for being so infatuated with the man. But if she's honest about it, he's going to overlook how she's obviously just too hot for this guy to do her job.
Yeah, this sort of interaction is kind of weird to a certain degree. Because it's sort of like, okay, you're only picking up on this with her. Why?
Yeah.
Other people sort of have this sort of weird reactions when they run into people kind of all the time on this ship. It's like, wait, this lady that I'm talking to, I am infatuated with her, but she might be a murderer, or maybe her dad is, but I'm the captain, so it doesn't matter as much. Well, I guess I don't have to worry about it too much.
Yeah, but this is a woman being infatuated with a man. That's just going to get her all distracted from her ovaries or something.
Ugh. Kirk.
Yes. Ugh. When he and MacGyver's leave, the patient wakes up, does some weird stretching, and grabs a surgical knife. When McCoy comes back, he holds the knife to McCoy's throat, but McCoy is weirdly calm about this and just starts telling him how to kill him most efficiently.
I actually kind of like this bit because it's like McCoy is just like, okay, I'm going to be a badass and just sort of like, yeah, you just are you going to murder me? Or are you going to strike, with a knife, or are you going to strangle me? Come on. This
is actually very good characterization for McCoy. It's some of the best character building we've seen for him thus far.
Yes.
It's just like, I'm not like, fine, just, here's how to kill me quick, do it. Come on.
Come on. Just, shove that knife into my neck. Do it. Come on, man.
The man lets him go and asks to see the captain. Just fine, you get to make demands now, I guess. Sure. When Kirk arrives, the man asks questions about what is going on and what happened to his people. Kirk tells him that they are going to a nearby starbase and that they will revive his crew once they get there. Kirk asks for his name, and the man says that it is Khan.
Well, that seems like a name that we could quite easily start looking up things about.
Yeah, it does.
In fact, it kind of implies later that they really should be able to identify him quite easily.
You'd think so, maybe. Yeah, Khan refuses to answer any other questions about why they're out there, but does ask if he can look at the ship's technical documents. Totally normal question.
Yes. Yeah, sure, yeah, you said you're an engineer. This is fine. Go ahead and read through all our technical documents and learn everything you might need to know about our ship and how to run it and how to do anything with it, really. Come on, get started.
Back on the bridge, Spock and Kirk are discussing whether Khan is probably the product of a selective breeding program. Spock says that his age is about right somehow, and that in 1993, many of these supermen seized power in 40 nations simultaneously, which sparked off the Third World War.
Yeah. So, basically these, they were either, took control of the government or maybe were promoted there by outside forces. And so a large section of the planet was now under control of these guys. And at some point, I think it's mentioned that Khan ended up, controlling like a quarter of the planet, too. So
yeah. Kirk says that these were not supermen. They were aggressive and arrogant. And Spock says that it's because superior abilities breed superior ambition.
And Kirk's just like, well, that's interesting if it's true.
It's like, it's fine. Yeah, that's the only problem here. They just got too ambitious.
Anyway.
In sickbay, MacGyvers comes in and tries to ask Khan about his past and his ship, but he is much more interested in forcibly and creepily taking her hair down in a very uncomfortable way.
It's like, your hair, it's not attractive. And she's like, but I like it like this. It's comfortable. And he's like, I'm going to fiddle with your head here. Don't mind me.
Yeah, she keeps trying to ask him questions, and he just grabs her head and starts messing with her hair. Ugh.
I think he might be a creeper. Might want to leave this one alone.
We cut to Kirk and company all dressed up in a dining room. Kirk says that MacGyvers has recommended that they have a formal dinner to welcome Khan aboard, and McCoy worries that MacGyvers is getting too overwhelmed by her infatuation with Khan, because he's all charismatic and she's all interested in the past, and she's going to be overwhelmed.
There does seem to be some degree that there's this, charismatic attraction she has with him, but just to sort of jump there automatically once again, because this seems to be happening a lot on this ship, and being all like, "Oh, this is terrible." In this case, is a little double standard here, guys.
Yeah, and I don't know, because this next scene is pretty horrible. Khan enters MacGyver's quarters and comments on the many paintings she has around the place, and she says that she paints bold men from the past. Khan uncovers one of the unfinished canvases and sees a painting of himself half-finished.
Yes.
He says that he is honored, but warns MacGyvers that such men take what they want. And then he runs up, he grabs her and kisses her. Now, this was pointed out to me that this is the way that they handle basically every time a man seduces a crew member or a woman on this show.
Yeah.
The woman always looks terrified.
Mm-hmm.
That this is not a situation where she looks okay or comfortable in any way, but it is still exhibited to us as if it is some sort of consensual, okay thing to be happening.
Yes, I am afraid that this guy is going to force himself on me, and then I'm suddenly okay with it when he does.
Yeah.
Oh. This
Which
isn't how like real people work, guys, by the way.
no, which also like this is how this was written and directed. It doesn't matter whether or not real people work like this. Like the people who wrote this show and directed this show wanted this to be the like seductive message that was being sent, that the woman's going to look uncomfortable and afraid and horrified of the situation, but it's okay.
Some of this is, sort of an artifact of how, romance with strong, male characters of this sort were sort of written at the time, but still, it's really not good, guys.
Well, the reason that they were written this way at the time is because that is the narrative that men wanted to have to justify their actions in any given situation.
Exactly. And so it's not a good excuse. It's just sort of the reasoning behind it for what there is, I guess.
Yeah, and then you get into your good old cultural Ouroboros, where this is going to influence the people who see it and think that this is the okay actions to take, and that's going to let them justify putting it into media more, and so on and so on.
Yeah, sort of a cascade of bad decisions resulting in bad actions.
Yes. They finally get to the dinner, and Kirk starts asking Khan about what he's doing in space, and Spock asks a few leading questions as well. Khan says that they were out just for the adventure because there was very little left on Earth. Spock comments that there was, the war to end tyranny. Khan responds that maybe it wasn't tyranny, but an attempt to unify humanity, and that he believes that one ruler would have eventually taken over all of Earth and accomplished so much just like Rome.
Like Roman, it's slavery and, occasionally killing off populations when they didn't seem to work well with the empire, that sort of thing.
Yeah, because, people that justify their actions by trying to build another Roman Empire never works out badly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Kirk baits Khan by calling him a coward for leaving Earth in a time of need. Khan gets angry and responds that they were trying to offer the world order, and then he realizes what he said and goes, good job, Kirk, and leaves.
You found me out. Ho-ho! I'm out of here.
Yeah. Later, MacGyver's goes to Khan's quarters. He grabs her, she asks him not to, and he throws her to the ground, and then uses some really heavy abuse tactics, telling her that she needs to decide if she wants to stay. And then when she does say she wants to stay, he goes, no, now you have to beg me to stay. Ugh. Mm-hmm. He then grabs her hand, hurting her until she kneels down, and says that he intends to take the ship. She asks him not to make her betray the ship, and he throws her away again and gets disgusted with her, and after all this great abusive manipulation that they just show on screen like it's normal or something, she agrees to do whatever he wants.
If you really love me, as you do, you are going to betray everything you know and all your friends and your captain and your crewmates, and let me take over and do everything I wanted. Yeah.
No, but this is just horrible. Like he keeps physically assaulting her, then keeps telling her to make the decision to stay. So now psychologically it has to be like her decision, and now it's her fault in like this stupid abusive justification thing we're getting.
Indeed.
And then it's just like, well, fine, it's romantic, That's the thing. Like they show this legitimately abusive stuff happening. This is like realistic abuse tactics, and it's still presented as some sort of romantic consensual relationship.
And when it really isn't. Now, I guess the only really saving grace of this particular situation is that it is the bad guy that's doing this. So.
Yeah, I mean, for once it is the bad guy. Yes. But we've also seen this from all of the good guys, so are we supposed to think it's bad or not?
Yeah,
and we're really not supposed to think it's bad, and we'll see why in a couple scenes here. But they do not present this as if it is bad in any way in this entire show.
Yes, it just sort of happened to be coming from someone who is presented as being bad.
Yeah. In the briefing room, Spock has found the historical records on Khan, which you'd think they would have been able to find earlier.
Yep.
His name is Khaaaaaannnnn, and he was the dictator of a quarter of Earth from 1992 to 1996, ruling over the majority of Eurasia.
Yeah, so I'm guessing India, China, Southeast Asia, through the Middle East, maybe perhaps even a little bit of Northern Africa, maybe Russia, something like that. A massive empire, a globe, stretching sort of Mongolian, putting them to shame sort of deal.
Scotty says that he always had an admiration for Khan, and Kirk goes on to talk about how much he loves the idea of superhuman dictators.
Guys, what are you doing?
As Spock points out, they're talking about ruthless dictatorships.
Thank you, Spock, for pointing out the obvious.
But Kirk and Scotty point out that even though they were horrible dictators who oppressed their people, they didn't kill as many people as they might have done.
And that makes it okay. Why?
Spock hates everything about these dumb humans, but everyone is just like, oh, it's okay, we love dictators. Ha 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 ha.
I think I'm with Spock here. Like, what? WTF, man? Come on. The rest of them are just like chuckling it off.
The end of this scene of everyone laughing about how much they admire horrible dictators. Kirk goes on to confront Khan about all of his new discoveries. Khan says that it's true, and that he and his people left Earth for a chance to build their own world. Khan says that even though he is interested in Kirk and his abilities, he is simply an inferior human because humanity has not evolved much in the last 200 years, which is not how evolution works.
Not really, no.
Kirk leaves, and Khan then forces open his door and knocks out his guards.
Yeah, he does this sort of the crazy stretch thing again, where he's like focusing his strength or something like that.
Yeah, or something. It's vaguely racist pseudo-Asian TV junk.
Yeah, it's like this is not quite Tai Chi, but our audience doesn't know anything, so
Yeah. In the transporter room, MacGyver's is betraying the ship and takes over the controls so she can beam Khan aboard the Botany Bay. Once there, Khan wakes up his crew and tells them that they have a universe to conquer.
Hooray, a whole universe that's ours for the taking, and also more fishnets.
Yes. Now, on the ship, there's... they show maybe a dozen or so people, and it's kind of roughly half and half male and female. Once they get to the briefing room where he's starting to take over the ship just now, all men.
I guess all the ladies went off to do something else?
I suppose. Yeah. On the bridge, security informs Kirk that Khan has escaped, and now the bridge is under lockdown, and their emergency intruder systems have been turned off.
Huh. Well, hopefully it's not that guy we saw, showed all the tech specs to.
Yeah.
That would have been silly of us.
He calls engineering only to find that Khan has used the technical know-how they gave him to take over the ship and cut off life support to the bridge.
Whoops, what fools we were.
Kirk heroically refuses to surrender, but this just leads to everyone on the bridge passing out.
Yeah. Well, there's a little bit with Kirk ordering Spock to try to flood all the decks with neurogas or something like that. And I just couldn't help but think of the game Portal, where basically Kirk's trying to pull a GLaDOS.
Yep. I mean, I honestly thought that this gas thing is a pretty good idea, that they don't replicate another series.
Yeah.
Of like, what if we have intruders on board, just flood everywhere but the bridge with knockout gas and sort it out later?
Yeah.
That's not bad. It's not it's like a horrible emergency use thing, but at least it's a decent idea as opposed to other ways this ship seems to be designed.
Indeed. Yeah, it's like, well, we just need a quick off switch for everyone else on the ship, so let's just be able to do that real quick.
Back in the briefing room, everyone wakes up except Kirk, who is missing. Khan orders Uhura to turn on the view screen, and when she doesn't, he orders one of his men to move in and grab her and hit her until she does it. He's going to hit her even more, but MacGyver steps in and stops him.
Yeah, at least she's trying to not perpetuate the evil here with the violence.
We'll get into that. Khan says that he's made a mistake by suffocating them all together, and it would be much better for him if he suffocated them individually and made them all watch.
I don't know. This seems like a bit of cruelty to me here, but I guess his logic is to follow that he's trying to convince everybody to join up on his side, and
for
Yeah, well,
some reason.
yes. Otherwise, you're gonna be all die like this. It's horrible.
Mhm.
So here, watch Kirk do it.
Yeah, the screen turns on to show Kirk in a pressurization chamber in sickbay in which all the air has almost been depleted. Khan says that he will let Kirk live if they give him the ship and take him to a colony that he can rule over. They all refuse and watch Kirk suffocate.
Well, I guess we're down to Captain Spock. You're in charge.
Yay! Spock's
Yay!
going to be in charge now.
Maybe we can get out of this madness. No more handing over tech manuals or something like that.
MacGyvers asks if she has to stay and watch this. Khan is disappointed in her weakness, but tells her she can go anyway. Yeah. As soon as she leaves, they lose the view screen signal, but Khan says Kirk's probably already dead and tells them to take Spock to the pressure chamber. MacGyvers goes to the pressure chamber and knocks out the guard with a hypospray needle.
Oh, yeah. So she's doing a second heel face turn here.
Apparently. She lets Kirk out, but says since she saved Kirk's life, he has to not kill Khan.
Well,
It's a half turn, I guess.
Okay. Can we wound him a lot? Is that acceptable?
The guards enter with Spock, and Kirk distracts them while Spock knocks them out with a neck pinch. So I guess that still works on quote-unquote superhumans.
Yes. Well, it seems to work on a lot of aliens, too, so I guess it's just sort of one of those weird universal things that most creatures have.
It's a universal nerve cluster. Yeah. Spock goes to turn on their anti-intruder mechanism, gassing the entire ship.
So there goes the neurotoxin.
Yeah, finally. In the briefing room, the gas pours out of the vents and everyone starts to pass out except for Khan, who runs out of the room.
And though I missed it on my my first viewing, I did look at and Scotty also makes it out, which explains something
Yes.
a little later.
Yeah, they both make it out so that Scotty can inform them of what's happening. Spock reports that the gas has been closed off from engineering, so Kirk goes there to get Khan. Scotty reports that they know Khan's in engineering, which gives him enough warning to hide behind the door. And yeah,
it's kind of because they're making these communications over the ship-wide broadcasts here, so everyone on the ship can hear this.
Mm-hmm. Not only this got me because this is exactly this tactic that Kirk used 5 minutes ago to knock out the other guard. It's like, I'm going to hide behind the door and then jump out and get him. And then he runs to the room and goes, where's the guy?
Oh, no. Well, I guess maybe the implication is that, Kirk and Khan are supposed to be sort of on the same level because they're using the exact same tactics.
Yeah, we'll get to that too. Ugh. Khan knocks Kirk away, grabs his phaser, and crushes it with his bare hands to show how superior he is, I guess.
Alternatively, their phasers suck.
Yeah. The ship is set to overload, but this isn't particularly important. So, the ship's going to blow up. But Kirk and Khan have one of those weird Star Trek fights where it's obviously not the actors. Like, really, really obviously.
Yep.
Kirk grabs some sort of engineering beaten stick that just happens to be in the wall and knocks Khan unconscious with it.
It kind of looks like it's like a control rod or something like that. Like you turn it, it would operate some sort of mechanism deep in there. But other than the handle, the one end, it's just sort of a cylinder.
Yeah, it's just a random beaten stick that I don't know why is in there. I was just looking at this, going, what on earth is this thing? It looks like a soap dispenser. It's a giant soap dispenser. Kirk, McCoy, Scotty, and Spock are now presiding over a court to sentence Khan with the cool little Navy bell and everything. Kirk drops all charges.
Okie dokie. I
Yep.
guess that gives him excuse not to kill Khan.
Well, everyone thinks he's crazy, but Kirk says it would be a waste to send them to a re-education colony or whatever they called it. Which, why? But Kirk decides that he can drop Khan off on a nearby unpopulated planet. Khan asks if Kirk has studied Milton, and Kirk goes, aha, I understand. Yes. And then he tells MacGyvers that she can either go with them or be court-martialed, and she decides to go with them because apparently she and Khan are just in love.
She's gone full fangirl here, I guess.
Yeah, and they're all escorted out. Scotty asks what in the world Milton is, and Kirk quotes, "It's better to be a ruler in hell than to serve in heaven." So, yeah. Spock
So I
says
guess he's going to be doing that.
Spock says they just planted a seed, perhaps in space, and it will be interesting to see what crop grows from it.
Yeah, in 100 years.
Yep. That's all.
I don't know. This colony of theirs, I'm not going to give it 6 months.
Maybe 15 years. We'll see.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's weird. This episode was not as badly made or written as some of the other ones, but it's got some very horrible things happening in it.
Yeah, true. You know, in fact, I'd say this is maybe one that of the lot we've gone through, probably one of the better ones in total, except for that stuff.
Yeah, overall, it's like the dialogue's better written. There's an okay amount of characterization.
Mm-hmm.
It's filmed a little bit better than some of the other ones, honestly. But
Indeed.
The actual content of the episode is just horrifying on every level.
We've already gone over the kind of rapiness here.
Yeah, there's that,
tactics.
which I guess I don't need to reiterate too much more. But yeah, there's definitely like not only abuse tactics and this like non-consensual but definitely yes consensual thing that they always do when they're seducing women on this show, but then the ending where she's just like, oh, but we're actually in love and I care about him and I'm gonna go live with him on his colony planet. Yeah,
lady, it's clear you were kind of a fan girl about history before all this, but you've just gone completely off the deep end here.
But like everyone being okay with this, like, oh, definitely, she's obsessed with the guy. Of course, she should go off and live in his weird little rapey colony thing.
Well, I guess maybe Kirk's thinking is, well, maybe if she's not put on the planet with them, she might try to come back here and rescue them or something like that. So he might be sort of implying like you should probably actually do this, but it's not really given a clear context if that's anything remotely close to his mind on that.
Yeah. Ugh. I don't know where to start with the stupid eugenics stuff. They are way too okay with eugenics in this episode.
Yes.
Like the only problem they actually say they have with selective breeding and like the implementation of this quote unquote Superman race is that they got too ambitious and tried to take over. That is the only issue, apparently.
So maybe we should take a step back and give a quick rundown of what eugenics actually is what it is.
Yeah. So I don't know. Do you want to start in the 1800s?
Well, I guess that's a good place as any, I guess.
So yeah, there was this guy called Francis Galton, who was a horrible racist, but also founded like 90% of the science that we use now.
Damn it, Galton.
Yeah. He pioneered a lot of like, weather prediction things, meteorology. He was a pretty well-known statistician. He came up with the bell curve and normal distribution. Basically, most things that we know now was this dude had some hand in most of the science and math and whatever that we still use.
And it's back in the day, it was if you were sort of competent enough and inquisitive enough, you could actually sort of dabble in a lot of these different fields and make substantial contributions. And like one of the stories that I am heard back when I was in grad school was the story of what was it, Lord Dalton or something like that, or Walton? I forget the exact guy's name, but he was a guy that was living in the Revolutionary War era in the United States, in what would become the United States, but he was actually working for the British. And once, the U.S. declared independence and was able to fight off the British, he's like, well, I'm out of here. And he went off to live in Germany for a while, where he developed all these sort of things, including advances in fireplaces and keeping meals and logistics and designing cities and all this other crazy stuff. And just like, well, I got some people that are able to foot the bill, so I can just spend all my time thinking about this stuff.
Yeah, this wasn't uncommon among the kind of genteel classes of these time periods. This particular guy, Galton, was actually the half-cousin of Charles Darwin, where he started thinking about Darwin's, evolutionary biology and the, descent of man sort of things.
So what you're saying is that when a creature can be more fit if these things happen.
He came up with this idea that he called eminence, which was basically his own personal measure of how great a person was, all the great things and deeds that they did. He looked at leaders like Napoleon, Napoleon would have been after this, I think.
No, Napoleon was early 1800s.
Early 1800s. So he looked at leaders like Napoleon, like Alexander the Great, anybody who basically took over a chunk of the world at any given time.
So basically, he was a big fan of the great man philosophy of interpretation of history.
Yeah. And he decided that great men have this thing that he called eminence, which is, he decided, an inheritable trait. But also, because of his work with statistics, he decided that all things will eventually tend towards a statistical norm. Meaning, if you take someone who had eminence and you follow their descendants, they become less and less great as the kind of eminence in their bloodline becomes diluted by laissez-faire breeding.
So what you're saying is that some sort of positive evidence plus mediocre evidence would lead to kind of mediocre evidence.
Yeah.
Yes. But I guess it does beg the question, where did the first person with that crazy eminence come from?
No one knows. He didn't care.
Unanswered questions. Okay.
Yeah. So he decided that the best thing to do with this information would be to examine your family tree and use what he coined positive eugenics. Eugenics is a combination of a couple of of words meaning like good and kind of offspring, breeding sort of thing. So like good children, basically.
Generations, genes, that sort of things.
Yeah.
So genes as in DNA was like still to come.
Yeah, they haven't figured that out yet, but some of this work leads to that in a creepy way.
Yes.
Yeah. So he was a proponent of what's called positive eugenics, which is basically breed with other sophisticated, well-off people because obviously they're the best people and you're going to have good old babies. He wrote a lot about how the lower classes bred earlier and more frequently than the, better off, educated, obviously superior upper classes, and that's a problem.
Those poor people, they don't know how to wait a few years. They're just horny all the time.
Yeah, he was a horrible dude,
and their immorality is just gonna be the downfall of humanity.
Where we get into the version of eugenics that we know and hate today, and what they were using in this episode is from America through the 1910s and 1930s. Yeah. There was an American eugenics movement kind of spearheaded by this guy named Charles Davenport.
Oh yeah, I remember that name.
He took some of these ideas and these like stupid kind of social Darwinisty breeding ideas and came up with the eugenics office in America, unfortunately close to where I live in Long Island.
So what you're saying is if you get a time machine, just set it up where you're at presently, you can go and beat this guy up.
Yeah. This eugenics office decided to look at all of the negative traits that were being brought in by European immigrants who were coming out of Europe after World War I.
So, that whole, it's like, these people we don't know because they speak a different language and are obviously fleeing terrible conditions and don't have money. They must have something wrong with them to be on our doorstep fleeing destruction and death.
Yeah. The basic idea here is that, all these other people are coming into the country and we have to be careful because they're going to dilute American greatnessitude.
Which hasn't up until this point, the people just kind of coming into the U.S. really as it was. So why is this suddenly different, guy?
Yeah, because there was a slight influx of immigration after World War I. And then these kind of social ideas took place, and we're very paranoid about kind of economic downturns that were happening around the same time. It was a pretty big, good old racist stew pot for these kind of ideas to come out of.
Yeah, so we need an excuse for why everything's terrible. So we'll blame these people and have this spurious reasoning about it.
Yeah, the American eugenics movement led to laws in several states beginning in 1907 and moving all the way up through way too recently. We'll get into in a second. These laws allowed for the forced sterilization of undesirable people, like people who were incarcerated or people with different abilities. Anyone that they decided was, an alcoholic or too dumb or had some sort of physical abnormality, they decided that these people should be forcibly removed from the gene pool for the good of all.
So what you're saying is you're taking away people's rights for bodily autonomy and for your own effectively excuse for things that are happening.
Yes. This actually only stopped in America in 2014.
Whoops.
Well, it was still legal and not uncommon to sterilize prisoners in California until it was finally banned like 5 years ago.
Wowzers. Yeah.
Yeah, the Supreme Court actually upheld this practice in the 1920s.
Damn it, Supreme Court of the 20s?
Yeah. Now, these ideas also led to some things that we think of as pretty normal nowadays, including the first American Immigration Act, which was passed in 1924. Before this, there was no particular limit or legality to people moving to America. They would just show up and you're fine. You're here. You can be a citizen, whatever. This put in quotas on how many people from various countries could come into America. A lot of it was to stem sort of European immigration, and it was also designed to completely shut down immigration from Asia in kind of response to a growing Chinese population in the American West brought in to work on kind of the railroads and westward expansion.
So we got some workers here. We don't want them to be the only workers. Oh.
So yeah, this is completely born out of racism and really faulty science. They had some things that we still use, like IQ tests were made out of this work, and the IQ tests were designed in such a way to be hugely biased toward educated people from a European background.
And that's why it's always important to, basically laugh at the faces of anyone. It's like, oh, my IQ test says I'm smart, and thus you should respect me.
Yes.
No, that's a complete BS.
And you had a lot of kind of cyclical work like this, where they made a biased IQ test and then gave it to the Army, and the Army found that, educated people of European descent were doing well on the IQ test, and then the guy takes those results and goes, oh, look how my ideas have been validated.
Exactly. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, effectively.
And let's just get this out of the way. Like, these scientists at the time were debunking this kind of research because the research itself was very cyclical and badly done and based on unexamined assumptions about racism.
Exactly. But when you're in a pattern that you're trying to justify this, you are going to do everything you can to sort of keep those outside voices that are trying to basically point out how complete nonsense this is. You want to try to keep them as quiet as possible and keep everyone focused on, oh, my great results here. Oh, look at this.
Mm-hmm. Now, eugenics was sort of started waning after the 1930s when the science was being more and more called into the question, and after behaviorism started to become the dominant form of psychology. Because if you can alter someone's behaviors based on their environment and various stimulus, then obviously it's not really a genetically predetermined part of their personality. Obviously, the final kind of nail in the coffin of this line of thinking was when the German Nazi movement took these American ideas and implemented them into full force, creating the Holocaust.
Yes, well, why just sterilize people? We could just murder them instead.
Yes.
Yeah, well, maybe this is a terrible idea.
Yeah, I suppose thankfully this was like isolated to several states in America at this time period, so the United States never was able to go full bore genocide with it,
Yeah.
even though there were people who wanted to. And then, so it's just the ideas that the Nazis used in World War II to justify genocide were directly taken from America in the 1930s.
So, sorry to burst anybody's bubble that about the U.S. being completely innocent and all of that. There are still people on this side of the Atlantic that were all about this, and we're kind of still advocating it, even when it was kind of like maybe this is not such a good idea here before World War II.
Yeah, it wasn't even until kind of midway through to after World War II, when the things that the Nazis were doing became widely publicized, that people even were thought to be outraged by this idea.
Yes. It went from being a disagreement of opinion, as they say, to, oh, this actually has real world consequences and they are terrible.
Yeah. But of course, that didn't stop us from still, like I said, they still used some of the forced sterilization into 2014, and we are still using a version of the immigration laws that were generated through this idea. We are still using IQ tests. We still look at a normalized distribution bell curve to define those IQ tests, and a lot of school grading systems. Even though grading on a bell curve has become slightly more unpopular, it's still something that's used today. We have a massive amount of these eugenic ideas that are just steeped in really old school racism, still deciding how our culture and government function now.
And then, on top of that, we also got people in the to this day who are still advocating for these same ideas, and well, unfortunately, they're getting a little bit more organized the last couple of years, and it's really kind of annoying, you could say.
Yeah, and here's the thing. We could probably spend the next 20 minutes going into a bunch of biological and psychological research that's been done on why these ideas couldn't actually function. I think that anyone who's still espousing these ideas is not using a logical system of thinking. Correct. So debunking it through scientific research not only is not going to work, but it gives this idea that it's something that can or should be debated scientifically. And I do not really want to do that.
And that debate has been over for decades.
Yeah. Suffice it to say that any kind of thing to do with this is definitely taking away people's bodily autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
So, you have this, you have the right to control what happens with you and to your body. So you have a right to have children if you want to. You have a right to not have children if you want to. And it's completely up to the individuals involved. This should not be something that is mandated by other people.
Mm-hmm. Put into place, and it's like, well, you're now going to be married to this person, and thus this is going to be happening here. The this sort of a thing does pop up in other science fiction too, by the way.
Yes, and so the main thing that I came across in some things with this is like, what are and who gets to define these positive traits?
Exactly. As I couldn't help but think about Babylon 5 on a couple of instances with this exactly. So there's a episode of Babylon 5 that first on the who evaluates this to make things proper. There's an episode in the first season where there is basically planet was tired of being invaded, so they built the ultimate super weapon that would destroy anything that was not a pure Ikaran.
It destroyed the entire population, didn't it?
Yep. Because who was who was putting together the criteria here was just so subjective about it, what they believed should be a pure Ikaran, that no one was able to actually meet the standards, and thus they were all destroyed in the process. And it's comes back to the point that when you're trying to sort of make this kind of evaluations, there's always going to be some subjective interpretation applied to it, and you might think you're being completely objective, but it's when your very existence of people is on the line. It's impossible to be fully sure of that. and there's all evaluate all your biases and to root them out. So it's one of those situations where maybe it's just better not to play the game at all.
Yes.
And the other bit of stuff that Babylon 5 got reminded me this episode reminded me of Babylon 5 for was the Psi-Corps, which is in the universe there is the organization that handles all the human telepaths. And if you are, and they have, ratings. So a psi level 1 is weaker than a psi 2, or, that's usually abbreviated as a P something. And so P5s, P6s, P12s, that sort of thing. And the higher number is, you have more, mental strength and are able to apply your will or read minds better or whatever. And the Psi-Corps is very interested in finding people that have high P levels here. And so part of their program is to help encourage marriages between people with high psi ratings in a very eugenic sort of fashion here. And there's a reason that in the universe, in the show there, that the Psi-Corps are basically coded as Nazis.
Ah, goody.
They wear these black uniforms with boots and gloves, and they have this very arrogant demeanor to them. And it's like, oh, this is this is a matter to us, and we are here to enact our will on the situation. And this is nothing you should concern yourself about. You should just let us do our work. As they're sort of going around as jackbooted thugs, trying to basically, usually it's going after rogue telepaths who don't want anything to do with them. So.
Yeah, I think it's like it gets into something that I was interested in talking about this episode with, in Babylon 5, they are coded as Nazis, which we can use as kind of on-screen shorthand for horrible people.
Yes.
In this episode, they are coded as noble, if misguided, explorers out to make a new life amongst the stars.
Which is a little different.
Yeah.
It goes from your thug there to more of a almost peaceful explorer, almost Star Trek-esque sort of vibe here. No way.
They had that scene where everyone is just going, "Aren't fascists great?" There's a line in there about how humans have a streak of barbarism in us, which they're using it to explain why you might admire someone who is doing these horrible things. But they're basically saying that if you don't admire a fascist dictator, you are less than human.
I'm going to call BS on that as well. So, because you can, there's it kind of goes back once again to that idea of the great man philosophy of a view of history that. Things only change because there are people in place to activate these changes in the course of history, which I don't believe is true at all, and there's a lot of evidence suggesting that that's complete nonsense. But it is easy shorthand, especially when you're sort of doing a casual look over history of okay, here's the important names. I remember those, and thus I am going to look at those names and they're directly attached to as far as events and accomplishments goes, and say this person is responsible for the modern world, and thus I should owe some respect to this person, for making my current, day-to-day existence possible. When that doesn't really follow through at all, and so so kind of, you twist that a little bit, and it's like, oh yeah, these people maybe have been barbaric, but at least the results of their work was cool, right?
Yeah, this whole discussion was very much just but the Nazis made the trains run on time argument.
Pretty much, yeah.
It's just but what about all the things to admire about horrible dictatorships?
This one murdered less people, so that's good, right?
This made me think of, I guess it might be a little bit unrelated, but there's this sociologist that I like named Alan G. Johnson. And he's written a lot about privilege and power. And he has this kind of definition of the default mode, like the default group, the default superior group in a society. And one of the things that he writes in the definition is that the privileged default group never has to have a conception of themselves. Basically meaning like a minority group that knows they don't have power has to have a perception of themselves as different from the default group.
It's it's like we are a bit isolated. We need to have create our own identity.
Yeah, but the default group doesn't have to do that. They are the default. If someone is talking about people, then they're talking about them.
Mm-hmm.
And this just really reminded me of that for two kind of reasons. Like the everyone else in the room at the time is a perceived straight white man.
Yes.
Except Spock, who is even though he's played by straight white man in the context of the show, he's supposed to be non-human.
An alien, yeah.
So everyone else sees themselves so much as this kind of default group that they somewhat see the quote-unquote superior eugenic humans as an othered group.
Mm-hmm.
But not so much as like an inferior group like they obviously treat alien societies.
Yes.
So they can't conceive of themselves as different. They see themselves in these dictatorships so much that's like, well, I mean, of course I would love to be a dictator and run things my way. Let's all admire this. Spock, as the othered group in this situation, is the only one who actually has perspective on what's happening, goes like, you all are admiring dictators.
Are basically through a roundabout way endorsing their behavior and actions.
Yeah, which this episode is just so freaking built on endorsing this stuff. And they knew that they were doing something wrong in this episode. They knew how effed up this was, because they go out of their way near the beginning to say that this group of eugenic humans is ethnically diverse.
Yeah. It's like, well, we don't want to be making this too Nazi-like here, so we'll make it so that that they're not doing this on racial lines.
Yes, so they go out of their way to say this. They know that they are doing something wrong here, and they are trying to backpedal it, but they do not. They are way too okay with what is going on. There's never a maybe we shouldn't control people's breeding. Like, not only that, but this worked. All right, all the descriptions that I read of this episode are using parlance that they introduce much later in the series, referring to genetic engineering.
Yes.
Which would be a direct manipulation of genes, which is something that we're getting into now. Also probably not particularly workable, but...
Yes. For similar, but also some other reasons.
Yeah. But that has a slightly higher chance of success than this weird selective breeding thing does. But they never refer to genetic engineering. Genetic engineering was not a thing that they had conceived of in this time period. They are going off of classical eugenics, which is a controlled breeding of populations for desirable traits.
Indeed.
And they are presenting it as something that works fine.
Works fine, and has done all these had this great accomplishment of this powerful empire, and so is good.
Yeah, and in fact, the only reason that it might be bad is that it is going to leave behind the not special people.
Yes, and the not special people were unhappy about that, so they rose up against them.
Since we're supposed to identify with the not as special people, I suppose, even though you aren't. So one of the things here in like the stuff I was reading about how they rewrote this episode and creating Khan as a villain figure, he is meant to be someone who is on Kirk's level. That's the whole idea of Khan, is he's supposed to be the Kirk antagonist, which means that they see Kirk as such a superior being that they literally have to invent a species of ultra-humans for him to be equivalent with.
So you've already created one Ubermensch, so how do you get someone who can compete with him? Well, you just make another one.
Yeah. And I suppose since you mentioned the Ubermensch, we should probably touch on Nisha a bit.
Yeah. So the Ubermensch is an idea that Nietzsche was the philosopher came up with, that basically it was a someone that has the ability as well as the force of will to go beyond normal morality, normal rules, and in order to enact their will upon the world.
Yeah, but the interesting thing with kind of Nietzsche and his Ubermensch idea was that it's not exactly someone with superior, like, mental and physical abilities the way that we would think of it now.
It's more of a more of a decision type structure.
Yeah, it's kind of a look at the person that you admire most and imagine how they are a superior person, then strive to meet that ideal.
And I'd like to touch on something real quick here. You mentioned the sort of difference between all this stuff and behavioralism. And I was sort of thinking during the episode when I was watching that maybe the reason Khan and all the other Supermen here were like as they were trying to take over countries and take over the world was because they had been told from the very beginning that, oh, you are this, and thus you are more able and should be in charge. And so you should embrace this philosophy of taking things for yourself and making the world as you see it should be.
Yeah, I was thinking about that a bit during the episode. Like it's a little oversimplified psychologically, but yeah, if you raise someone from birth and keep telling them they're better than other people, they're going to believe they're better than other people.
Yep. Surprise, surprise.
Now, I think we should also just clarify when we start talking about Nietzsche and ideas like the Ubermensch and other similar things that were later turned into Nazi propaganda. Nietzsche did not actually support any of those ideas. He died before the Nazi movement started, and his sister actually stripped out the ideas that she thought would be supportive of this governmental system and started espousing those. It's not his work. It's his sister's interpretation of his work directly changed in order to support the Nazi regime.
Yeah, it's a corruption of his original intent and purpose there.
Yeah, Nietzsche was like a really poor, traumatized dude.
Yeah,
who he came up with the "what doesn't kill me makes me stronger" mentality, which it's just, you can read his life, and the poor guy was just like abused by his mother and sisters, which made him not like women very much, and kind of I think he was kind of sickly and didn't get along with people and spent a lot of his life really kind of afraid. And he basically like really, really embraced these nihilistic philosophies in like nothing actually matters. God is dead. Like we don't have a replacement for religion in modern society. It is the downfall of everything. And we have to look to the strong and amoral actions that we can take in order to build a better humanity.
Sort of in some ways he was cornered, and so these sort of ideas became very attractive to him, and so he sort of built an entire philosophical framework out of it.
Yeah, he was like almost always sick and had some sort of wasting disease that I think was fairly unidentified at the time, and yeah, he was not living a very good life. And a lot of his philosophy seems to be very directly influenced by that. It have kind of a way to explain why all these horrible things are happening to me, which is pretty understandable psychologically. But you need to understand the context of this when you're looking at someone's life philosophy.
Indeed, I will like to point out something that I found was kind of amused by when I was reading up on him for this episode. That Nietzsche, when basically asked about anti-Semites, was like, no, you should shoot them. It's like, because he was just having nothing to do with this racial purity BS here.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, that's complete nonsense. And when people were like, oh, Germans are strong, he's like, no, I'm full-blooded Polish and I'm awesome. So screw you guys.
the frickin' one more thing, just with the stupid racial stuff in this episode. This weird line, I guess it's never actually confirmed, but the line in the beginning where they say Khan is probably a Sikh, like, I'm obviously coming from an outside perspective, but all the reading I've done, everyone that I've met, anything that I've heard about Sikh as a religion is very focused on being just kind of the nicest people in the world,
Mm-hmm.
with a huge emphasis on justice, restorative justice, equality, and social justice ideals.
So kind of the inverse of a power mad dictator.
Yes, the exact opposite of a power mad dictator.
And I'd also like to point out sort of one of those technical things that don't Sikhs have general philosophy, like you don't shave.
Yeah,
Correct?
you don't cut your hair at all.
Yeah, and that's Khan obviously is well kept on that.
Yeah.
He definitely shaves.
Yes,
No beard.
so this is written by people who have no clue who Sikhs are. Yeah, not to mention they got a Mexican actor to play a North Indian man.
I'm reminded a little bit of not quite the exact inverse, but kind of close. This a fellow named Reza Aslan, who's a religious philosopher. I don't remember if I mentioned him on the show yet, but he was talking about in a couple interviews that when he first came to the U.S., he's Iranian. And this was right around late 70s when there was a lot of, the whole, Islamic revolution going on there. And so, when he's growing up in the 80s, people would ask him, like, oh, where are you from? And he'd say, I'm Mexican.
Ah.
Because he didn't want to have to talk about Iran at the time.
Makes sense. Unfortunate, but makes sense.
Yeah. And, it's not quite one for one, but I guess they're trying to do something like that here. It's like, well, we don't got someone from northern India that we know to hire here, so Ricardo Montalban's popular. Let's get him in here.
Yeah, I saw an interview with Ricardo Montalban about playing Khan. He said they wanted someone who had muscles.
I mean, he does got them, so yes.
Yep, that was his entire thing.
Yeah.
That was it. I was working out at the time, and they needed someone who had muscles.
Of course, they could have maybe, coded this guy as from South America, perhaps.
Yeah, except for I don't know why they chose this part of India. Apparently, the name is because Gene Roddenberry had a friend from China with a similar name, and he hoped that by putting this guy's name in his show, his friend would reach out to him because they'd lost touch.
That's a really silly reason to put the character together like that.
Yes. It's hard for me to even think about how to talk about how much white supremacy must have just been laissez-faire in the writing and production of this episode. Because just being able to present eugenics as something this great. They try to take over the ship. If they hadn't tried to take over the ship, everyone would have thought they were just the best.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, we met these guys once. They were pretty cool. We eventually agreed to let them be on a colony, and everything was just peachy keen after that. And then we parted our ways.
Even having tried to kill the crew, Kirk's still like, yeah, let's not send them to prison. Let's let them have their chance at a new life that they totally deserve.
Let's be nice to these guys. They seem just swell.
Yeah, the whole thing is just eugenics is amazing. It works great, and we should let them go take over a planet just because look how great these guys are. I love it. It's the best. There's that thing that you kind of half mentioned earlier when MacGyver's is at least trying to prevent them from beating up Uhura. This episode about eugenics and about how great eugenics is has the white woman come in to save an African lady from being beat up by a white man.
Yeah. So I guess it's good that someone tried to prevent it, but still, it's a little white savior
they
complex
are
here.
Actually this episode about white supremacy. They are the meanest to Uhura I have yet seen on this show.
Indeed.
They tell her to shut up for doing her job at the beginning. They beat her up halfway through, and she has to get saved by the white lady.
Uhura, I hope you get your revenge someday. I got my fingers crossed, but I'm not too much expecting it.
We were talking about this. I was talking about this with somebody the other day, and I mean, it's obviously this show was an amazing step forward in representation at the time period, because I have seen so many interviews with people saying that like the representation that they had on this show like was so inspiring and so different and so much better than anything else that was in media at the time, that it was just this massive leap forward.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's great. I guess it shows how much progress we've actually made, that this just seems like the most racist shit to me right now.
Yep. we live in a very different time. And that's very good, but it also, it's like kind of shocking, looking back. It's like, oh God.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I am coming from a very privileged background. I never had to deal directly with racism growing up. Mm-hmm. So I understand that coming at this as a white guy who grew up in the 90s and saying like, oh, wow, look how racist old TV was, is like probably like a dumb revelation. But at least it shows some level of progress. I'm certainly not saying that we have made sufficient progress, but at least it's not this anymore, I suppose.
Indeed.
Well, I don't know how much longer I can talk about eugenics, so it's time for the galaxy's favorite game show.
Woohoo! Yay! Change the subject, please. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the game show portion of the show. I hope you're excited for some crazy awards here. Our first award is going to Scotty. It's called the Fanboy Award because he is way too much of a fanboy about this Khan character. What does he win, Gepwin?
Scotty wins one of those flags that you put up in your room, and when your friends come over, they see it and get really awkward and leave quickly.
Oh, Scotty, you scab. You should probably, not display that, actually. Yes, moving on. Second award is the Nietzsche is my homeboy award, which goes to Khan for all his being will to power and being all like, I'm going to force my will on people and stuff. What does he win, Gepwin?
Khan wins some actual books by Nietzsche, because they're different than that.
Oh, I guess maybe he has some reading to do. Well, I guess he's also going to have plenty of time on this Selly Alpha 5 place. All alone and building a new civilization, he might get bored. Our third award is the No Hard Feelings Award, which goes to Kirk for dropping all charges after the people took over his ship and just, doing an exile instead, because, whatever, it doesn't matter. What does he win, Gepwin?
Kirk wins. He should have died in Star Trek 2, because this is all his fault and was totally preventable.
Oh, yes, that is quite true. So I guess he's going to have his comeuppance at some point, but not what they should be.
Well, that is all our awards for today. I hope our contestants go die in a fire. Thank you for joining us on the galaxy's favorite game show.
Woohoo, yeah! Oddly enough, at least one of them does.
Yeah. Oh, that was a rough one.
Yep.
Next episode doesn't promise to be much better.
Oh, yes. The next one involves some sort of war, I think, right?
Yeah, hopefully maybe they'll take this, stance that killing people in war is wrong, but I can't guarantee that that's the stance they're going to take based on how they weren't able to even passively mention that eugenics is wrong.
Yeah, if I remember anything about this next one here, the main message is a little different, but
yeah,
I guess we'll have to find out when we actually watch it.
We'll have to actually watch it. We are moving, interestingly enough, from famous episode to famous episode, though, which I don't think has often happened in the past. The next episode is called A Taste of Armageddon.
What does it taste like?
It tastes like a computer.
So it's a lot. So it's a little on the metal side.
Yes.
Got it.
So I think I've seen this one a lot more often than any of the others. I may have seen this one 2 or 3 times, in fact. I've got a pretty good grasp on what happens in this episode, which very unusual. Like Space Seed, I remembered for Khan. I'd forgotten all of the rapiness.
Yeah, same here. In fact, I think I thought like the second half of the episode was like much more of it than it was.
Yeah. It was very weirdly slow from what I remembered. The next episode I remember is about war and not making it horrible enough for people's liking.
Yes.
That we're going to have to find out more about that next week on Watchers of Tomorrow when we take on A Taste of Armageddon.
Next time on Watchers of Tomorrow, everyone on board the Enterprise is killed. You have been listening to Watchers of Tomorrow, a podcast on science fiction media. Find and follow Watchers of Tomorrow on Podbean, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, Spreader, Digital Podcast, and perhaps many more to come. If you enjoy our podcast, make sure to subscribe for more. And where possible, make sure to rate your experience or leave us a review. You may find Gepwin on youtube.com/Gepwin and Twitter @Gepwin. You may find me, Dr. Isix, on youtube.com/Dr. Isix and Twitter @IsixLP. Music is Waveform and Mori's Principle, both by DRKRN. You can also check out the Watchers of Tomorrow Discord channel. Make sure to share the experience with your friends, family, enemies, and alien overlords. If you feel you are suffering from transporter syndrome, please be aware that the next time you step off the transporter, that you, that is now, no longer exists.